questions as well. So I'll leave you guys to do your talk.
Thanks very much. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for the introduction. We're from the Psychosis Research Group at the University of Glasgow. My name is Leonie Richardson. I'm one of the research assistants in the team.
My name is Ali Piri. I'm a public and patient involvement consultant in the team.
And I'm Steph Allen. I'm the other research assistant in the team.
Okay, shuffle back through. So we're here today talking on behalf of a much wider team, the Avatar 2 trial team. And we'd like to start by thanking Professor Andrew Gumley, who's the principal investigator for the Glasgow team, as well as Professor Philippa Garrity, who's the chief investigator on the Avatar 2 trial, for their kind of feedback and input on today's slides. Okay. So our talk today is going to focus specifically on the patient and public involvement program, so lived experience program in the Avatar 2 trial. And what we'd like to do is just offer some reflections and learnings from the work we've done and end on some recommendations which we hope can be translational, applicable to others looking to incorporate PPI into their research programs or indeed any other relevant settings. But first, over to you. So we'd like for this talk to feel quite reflective and interactional. So we thought we'd start by putting some questions to the audience, just to get our reflections going and get a sense of people's experience with PPI in the room. So if you feel comfortable doing that, and no pressure at all if you'd rather not, if you could raise your hand if you've had experience of being involved with PPI work, either through being part of a PPI group or working with PPI colleagues, or both. Okay, quite a bit of people, that's great. So perhaps if you want to, throughout the talk, think about your own experience and perhaps how that compared to the work we've done. And next, we'd like for you to take a wee moment, perhaps to reflect just within yourself on the questions we've put up on the screen here. Perhaps you can write down your answer or just have a think about it. We'll give you a minute to do that, and then we'll move on to the main part of our talk. And hopefully we'll cover some of the reflections and questions you've written down. But if we get to the end of the talk and we've not covered any aspects, then please do ask the question or come and find us at break to think about it. So what would you like to know about patient public involvement, or perhaps wish you would have known before you started doing PPI work? And do you have any anxieties about doing PPI work? I'll just give you a minute there. Okay, I won't draw this out. Thanks very much for taking a moment to think about this. So now moving on to the next main kind of bit of our talk, I'll just preface this that we're going to focus specifically on the patient and public involvement program in the Avatar 2 trial, but I'll start by setting the scene a little bit, giving you a bit of context to this work with an overview of the Avatar 2 trial itself more generally, and the clinical issues and research that's kind of led to the trial being set up. So voice hearing is a very common human experience, which is experienced across cultures. And it's really important to start by stating that far from everyone who hear voices are distressed by this experience or have a mental health diagnosis. That said, among people with a schizophrenia spectrum condition, around 70% hear voices. And for many people, that's an experience that can be very distressing and that can kind of lead to interference in people's everyday lives from really powerful voices that have that kind of impact in getting in the way of doing things that people might want to be doing. And something that's perhaps less kind of commonly known if you've not experienced voice hearing yourself or supported someone who does, is that it's a really diverse experience. Some voices can be highly characterized, so having a specific age, a gender, and people having an understanding of the voice's specific attitudes or personality, but it can also, some other voices can also be less clearly defined. Regardless of the type of voice hearing, both of these experiences can be really distressing, and typical NHS talk therapy are lengthy, difficult to access, and there's a need that's been identified for more accessible therapies that work specifically on reducing the distress that's associated with voice hearing. This leads us on to avatar therapy, which is a psychological intervention that was developed by Professor Julian Neff and Professor Mark Kirkvale in 2008 at University College London. And avatar therapy is a new talking therapy that is specifically designed to help with experiences of distressing voice hearing. And it involves developing a computerized representation or an avatar of the main distressing voice someone hears, so on a computer, and that's tailored to the person's experience and those characteristics of the voices, so that the avatar sounds like and look like we're relevant to the main voice someone is hearing. And the work involves creating a dialogue with the avatar with a therapist support throughout the sessions. And avatar therapy has been previously investigated in a pilot study as well as the first clinical trial, Avatar 1. Both of these were conducted in a London context and showed some good results on avatar therapy's impact on the distress associated with voice hearing. So the Avatar 2 trial itself built upon this work and was trying to extend it to different UK settings, but also optimize avatar therapy. So the Avatar 2 trial was funded by the Wellcome Trust, and it was a multi-site randomized control trial. So it was conducted simultaneously across 4 research sites, 2 in London, so King's College London and University College London, 1 in Manchester, the University of Manchester, and here in Scotland, the University of Glasgow. And we recruited 345 participants across health boards or trust, depending on where you live in the UK, associated with each of these research sites. And this recruitment period started in January 2021, and we completed it in November 2022. So the particularity of the Avatar 2 trial was that it was testing 2 forms of avatar therapy, one briefer version that involved about 6 sessions delivered by the therapist, and a more extended version, 12 sessions. So I'd draw your attention to the right-hand side of our screen here, where you've got an illustration that kind of represents a bit of the study design. So when people entered the study, they were randomly allocated to receiving either 6 sessions of the therapy, 12 sessions of the therapy, alongside the usual care they were already receiving from mental health services, or they were randomly allocated to the third pathway, which just involved continuing on with the usual care they were receiving from their mental health teams. And one thing to note is that everyone was eventually offered the therapy. So either through having been allocated to the 6 or 12 session during their participation in the trial, or for people who were allocated to continuing on with their current support throughout the study, they were offered avatar therapy if they wanted to do that at the end of the study. Okay. So just for me to finish here is on this slide, the key hypothesis and aims of the Avatar 2 trial. So in terms of what we expected to find is that both the Avatar Brief and the Avatar Extended versions would be more effective than current care in terms of reducing voice-related distress, voice frequency, and total voice severity. But alongside testing the effectiveness of the intervention and the 2 forms of the therapy, understanding a bit more how they work, there was also a really key element to establishing the feasibility of training NHS therapists in delivering avatar therapy. So thinking about implementation in existing services alongside the effectiveness of the therapy, which is also a really important outcome. So if you'd like to find out a bit more about avatar therapy, the Avatar 2 trial, how it was conducted, I'd highly recommend you visit the website. We'll be giving a link for that at the end of the presentation, and particularly the resource section, where you can find a whole range of resources and including scientific publications like the protocol for the study, which details what the Avatar 2 trial set out to do and what the methods were. I'll preface any question by saying that the results of the trial are not available yet, so we couldn't speak to that. But what we can speak to is the work we did in patient and public involvement. So that's the focus of our talk, and I'll pass you over to Ali to tell you more about that now. Cheers.
Thank you, Leonie. One important aspect of the Avatar 2 trial was the involvement of the public and patient consultants, and I'll speak to you why about this is important. And first of all, what is the public and patient involvement? This describes research conducted with patients and or their supporters rather than to them. Now, the aim is to ensure that the perspective, the experiences, and the needs of the public and the patients are considered, and in order to improve research and make it more relevant and useful to people and the communities that research aims to benefit. This means moving away from research with all the power drawn out like a magnifying glasses to peer at people, as you can see in the diagram there, to a more collaborative discussions where people can gather together for more co-produced research to answer important research questions which matter to those with first-hand experience. So there is no standard way to do PPI work. many different approaches have been used, and depending on the health or social issues addressed, and the project, the stage of the research and the study site. There is a lack of standardization. The lack of standardization can make it tricky to know where to start or how to do things well. So we did like to introduce you to how we approach this on the Avatar 2 trial and what we learned along the way. So in Avatar 2 trial specifically, the key principles and the ethos underpinning PPI on the trial regardless of any specific activity was the flexible involvement model. As you can see there, we followed a flexible involvement model, which is illustrated here on the diagram. This slide was developed by our colleagues from the NRIS network. The flexible involvement model means that each person can choose what they want to do or don't want to be involved with. So involvement looks different for each and every PPI member. And PPI members are always in control of their involvement. It also means that people can change how involved they would like to be over time, depending on their availability, interest, life circumstances, and etc. So there were over 30 PPI consultants involved in the flexible involvement model over the course of the trial across the 4 research sites. As you can see, there are several possible layers of involvement. It's like onion layers. So it depends. Like, for instance, going from consultation advice, that is being a PPI community member, up to direct involvement, that is in co-production and lived experience leadership. So I'll start with the first involvement level, the outer layer of the onion, as we might consider it. This could be being part of a community of colleagues who are kept informed through emails or just keeping their eyes peeled for any activities that take place which are interesting. And then the second layer, this could becoming involved with providing feedback and advice. And an example is consultation, for instance, and about documents for Avatar 2 trial participants. And then the third layer, this is like direct research involvement, such as conducting interviews to learn about people's experiences of therapy and data collection methods. So I'll now talk about PPI research activities that were done here in Glasgow. Specifically, the PPI group was set up for the purpose of Avatar 2 trial, and it ran for 24 months, which involves recruiting members of the local area that have lived experiences of psychosis and hearing voices. I specifically heard about PPI work from my CPN, and then I sent an email to Stephanie when we met, and she explained the role and the work of a PPI member to myself. So PPI consultants have been involved in a wide range of activities on the trial, as you can see there. For instance, they have been involved in staff recruitment, that is in the research team itself, by taking part in the recruitment of Avatar 2 research assistants. They have also been involved in the visibility of the trial by giving interviews and talks to a different audience, like, for example, with the Royal College of Psychiatrists at the rehabilitation conference. And then also, they've also helped to make the trial more accessible by advising on how to communicate information about the study and the payment for participants. They were directly involved in research work, for example, in the qualitative research work program, which I was also part of. The qualitative research program was built into the trial, and it involved a range of qualitative sub-studies to explore in depth different aspects of the wider trial. So PPI colleagues conducted and co-produced qualitative interviews with Avatar 2 participants about their experience of receiving Avatar therapy, and they were involved in data collection methods used in the wider trial. They worked on developing study materials and interview questions, and they co-conducted the interviews as well. They also supported with the interpretation and the analysis of the data of these qualitative interviews. They were involved in that analysis, and also for other projects led by doctoral students. They were also involved in teaching, that is, in taking part in giving presentation on training to doctoral students about experiences of voice hearing and therapy. The list is not exhaustive, but this gives you a flavor of all the kinds of things PPI consultants have been involved in this study. So I'll pass you over to Stephanie, and she will tell you more about the successes, challenges, as well as the learnings from PPI work.
Thank you, Ali. So I'm just going to chat a little bit about some successes we've enjoyed, also focus on the challenges. I could feel it's really important for us to be honest. We're trying to share what we've learned, just to say like perhaps what has went less well. Some we've been able to work around, but some have been like systemic barriers, which just, I guess, is really useful to highlight for people that are considering doing this work. And then chat a bit about some learnings, what we'd love to do if we had a chance to do it all over again. So I'll start off with successes. I think the first really striking one, and touched on a bit in Professor Lloyd Evans' talk earlier, like recruiting to trials in mental health can be really tricky. Often a great many of them quite simply don't recruit enough numbers, so we can test those hypotheses to see if these interventions are creating the effects that we hope to see. But Avatar 2 recruited to target and on time, which is quite impressive. But one thing, like just working as a research assistant, is I really want to highlight just how incredible our PPI colleagues were in helping us achieve that. There are people taking part in the study who accessed Avatar therapy, who went through all their follow-up appointments, and who are helping us answer this important question, as if the intervention does reduce voices. And the only reason they were there is that a PPI member helped us promote the study. Either that's like helping us communicate the study well, like making our posters more accessible, or even just some simple practical knowledge, like sharing information about like who'd be best to approach in a mental health team, and coming along to presentations to speak a bit about the personal experience of being involved in the study. They've been absolutely incredible, and I don't know really where we'd be without them. And also one thing I've noticed in my role as a research assistant is just their impact on just the general team and trial culture. Our PPI colleagues like attended all of our team meetings, coming like down to London, Manchester and Glasgow, and they were held there, sometimes to speak about their experiences of the therapy, but also to reflect on what it's like to live as someone with distressing voices, speaking about experiences such as stigma and discrimination in the workforce. And like them sharing that information and insight, it's been really helpful, because often when you're doing a clinical assessment with someone, there's lots of kind of contextual factors, such as interacting with the Department of Work and Pensions, that are, again, the knowledge that I'm drawing upon is from our PPI colleagues, like taking the time to like go through that with us. And I'm just, again, really grateful to them. And our leadership and Avatar team, like Professor Philippa Garrett has really highlighted, that having PPI leadership and contribution at meetings was like a really key part in the trial and what's helped it work well. Again, like other successes, is the increased project visibility. Perhaps the most key one is like one of our PPI colleagues here in Glasgow had access to therapy, volunteered to speak to BBC Scotland about his experiences of doing so, and just can't express just how incredible it was to see a BBC News reader read out that hearing voices is a really common experience, and it's something that people can get treatment for. And again, just coming back to trial recruitment, there's people sitting out there in Scotland who heard about us from the news and then referred themselves and then took part in the study. So it was kind of successful in two ends. It helped promote the study. Also, more widely, it helped reduce the stigma and normalise the experience of hearing voices. And also in terms of our project accessibility, we noticed early on we would try and explain using lots of words, like we'll do this assessment, then that assessment, and that assessment. And quite understandably, people were getting a bit confused. So our PPI colleagues, again, that they worked with us to create this diagram which more succinctly explains like people's flow through the study. I know it might seem really obvious, but it wasn't to us. And again, it's just a really key example of why getting out your ivory tower, working directly with PPI colleagues is the way to go. And also another key success is implementing PP ideas and co-production. Ali's touched a bit on the quality of research programmes, so I won't repeat what he's already told you, but just to highlight again that at the end of Avatar 2, we'll have some nice outcomes on whether or not it reduces distress, but that can only tell you so much. Like the quality of programme are really touching key issues, what it's like to access the therapy. And our PPI colleagues, again, have been really key in helping us interpret that information, like significant to who, just to have us cast that lens wider to understand what it will be like for people experiencing the therapy. Also, as creative writing workshops with lots of blogs on their website, it can be really intimidating for a PPI colleague to share a blog about their experiences of stigma or a poem they've written. So one of our colleagues in London noted that people were quite anxious at doing that. So he came up with the idea of having a creative writing workshop where people could come together, have protective time to talk to each other, share ideas and get peer feedback. So that's something that's really successfully implemented in the trial. And it's also ended up being a podcast. I don't think MD at the start of Avatar thought there'd ever be a podcast, but it's launched on our website tomorrow. We've got the link, you should definitely check it out, it's fab. And that idea was suggested by a colleague here in Glasgow, and it wouldn't be happening without him. And also seeing that our colleagues like just really thrive, like some people have came along who didn't know much about research before, and like, you know what, I really enjoy this. This is maybe something I could consider doing for myself. That's been nice to see. I've seen the timings, I'm going to fly through this. Just the challenges of experience is just establishing the PPI colleague role. We started the study during lockdown, remember that? So I guess like just going out, linking in with third sector organisations, just to try and make sure that everyone gets an equal chance. Also keeping PPI on the agenda during busy times in the study. Also, coordination of PPI meetings and inputs, important to remember, like PPI colleagues have lives, you know, they're not sitting around just waiting to do your PPI group. So just making sure to find out what people's capacity is and linking in. Also, bureaucratic and systemic barriers to participation. Because one, for example, from our qualitative programme, the sponsor said they needed like a clean disclosure Scotland check, and I'm not using this talk to get into the rights or wrongs about that, but I want to highlight that it was exclusionary to some of our PPI group, and it's maybe something we could have thought about in advance had we had PPI input earlier. And also the emotional demands of drawing upon personal experience. Our colleagues had access to supervision from a clinical psychologist. It's important to the whole team to treat colleagues as colleagues, just be available for like a chat after if somebody's having a tricky day, and just be aware that it might be trickier to draw on your own life than it is like your training. And if we got to do it all again, we'd create time for good relationships, we'd make sure we're inclusive and accessible, and would have it embedded at all levels of the project. So it's quite simply again, just adopting that flexible involvement, make sure there's adequate time, embedding it in the wider team and providing safe, supportive environment, and actively seeking feedback and suggestions, highly likely to tell you something you've never thought of and it's recommended you do. And since we're just before the tea break, we thought would be really cliche and just put it together. Perfect PPI ingredients, or PPI for short. We've decided psychosis research is a lemon pie as it's our favourite. But, you know, you're sitting out there studying a strawberry pie or an apple pie, we think something will be translational. A solid crust of relationships and time with a delicious filling of inclusivity and team culture. And from that, we hope PPI leadership and outputs will emerge. And if you want to check out our website, if you scan the QR code, it'll take you to our resources section. But simply, if you want to have a chat, come talk to us at the break. I promise we're very friendly.
Thank you so much for that. That was really, it's got my my
thoughts going for sure. So we just before, I know it's just before coffee break, but I'm sure people have got some questions and we've got a little bit of time. So there's a question up there. I'll stay down here if I can.
Hi, I work in artificial intelligence and mental health, but I'm also a PPI co-applicant on the DataMind project. And in both in data, whether you're working in AI or in DataMind itself, where we're trying to make data sets available across the UK, one of the problems is, and in PPI, one of the problems is diversity. So diversity of data, or quite often excluding people, but particularly in PPI, you can exclude people quite easily. And we tend to self-select because we've got the time and the money to be able to do it. So how did you, or what challenges did you face in terms of getting that right? And do you have any tips on how to improve diversity in PPI?
Been nominated to answer this one. Also, they'll just caveat by saying that all of society is typically exclusionary. Like, I think one recent study that was done that said only 4/5 of people with schizophrenia diagnosis are even eligible for most clinical trials. Things, unfortunately, as you say, have a lot of exclusions baked in. So I'm not going to stand here and claim we were able to solve that. Absolutely not. And I do think, like, a lot of people are excluded, and even as we touched upon, even people who we did invite in were excluded from some aspects. But I think things, I suppose, we've done reasonably well, which I think would replicate for doing again, is just trying to cast the net out wide as possible. Like the advertising online, one thing was helpful is having good relationships with our local mental health teams. There's sometimes people would say, oh, I've got somebody who might be interested, and PPI could kind of link in. I guess that introduced us to people who might not have accessed some by the kind of usual mechanisms. That your project sounds amazing. Does that answer your question? Thanks.
Oh, behind.
Thanks, Stephanie. And one in an additional response to the question just there about research being exclusionary, especially from a PPI perspective. I was recently at a Glasgow University meeting where we were talking about diversity, and it's not just an issue in mental health research, it's an issue across research. One of the things that came back from some of the community members in that meeting is that by definition, universities can be exclusionary, particularly for people who feel that they don't fit in those environments. And actually, one way around that put by those members was for research teams to come out of their comfort zone and go into community settings, and not just mental health community settings, particularly for people from ethnic minorities. They found that health settings were predominantly kind of white centric. And I think we need to take that on board. Just another ask as well. I think myself and Susie might be approaching Avatar to request that we can get you to write up a case study of your PPI involvement and use that when in some of our work around PPI.
Thank you. Another question here? Yeah, thank you.
Hi, so firstly, I would like to appreciate your teamwork. Yep, and especially to Ali for being very courageous to give a presentation. And I learned a lot from this avatar therapy because it's actually quite new to me. But schizophrenia isn't something that is quite new to me because I used to work with the schizophrenic patients when I was in Burma, in Myanmar, and also when I was in Thailand as well. So the question is avatar therapy available for hospitalized patients, like who are in patients, and also about how about the schizophrenic patients who are not that very dilating and not that very functioning to use the technology, and about the technology barriers, like how when they cannot use the technology or at the places which is not available, because those kind of voices will still play in the mind every time and everywhere as well. Yes, thank you.
Yep, sure. Take that one. Thanks very much for the question. That's really interesting. At this stage, the therapy is kind of still at that research stage, and we'll be looking at lots of these questions actually with the results of the Avatar 2 trial when they do become available. So without being able to answer your question very straightforwardly or with very solid data, which we, I mean, have the data, yes, the results not yet. If being in hospital was not a barrier to taking part in Avatar 2, we recruited people from inpatient units who could then kind of go and meet the therapist at, where they were based in hospitals. So that would be the first answer, and so that was not a barrier to participation in Avatar 2. And when it comes to, I suppose, digital literacy and being able to use the tools, that's also a really important question and a really interesting one. And part of the aims of Avatar 2 trial, were to examine kind of how that can be implemented within existing services in the NHS. So that's also something that hopefully we'll be able to speak to, or we or the wider team would be able to speak to in a bit more details further down the line. But that's something that was always in collaboration with the therapist. So didn't really need any kind of digital confidence, because you just had to be able to sit in front of the computer and then interact with the avatar themselves. The therapist was there, to help with using the technology. But indeed, that's a really important question and a really relevant one to Scotland, where digital exclusion is a real issue. But yeah, there's lots of work also be happening on trying to develop the avatar therapy platform, the software, so that it can be used. I mean, I don't know the ins and out of it, but to be used in broader settings and more easily. So these are all really important questions, and are being kind of hopefully tackled, and we'll find out more about it when the Avatar 2 trial results are available. So thanks.
Thank you. And let me have a look. We need to stop now because it's just after 11:30, and I know everyone will be ready for their break. So thank you everyone for your attention this morning, all your great questions, and thank you to everyone who spoke. So back in half an hour. Yes.